The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. I got to know Russ Ramsey when we were bitter rivals in an American Idol fantasy league. That sounds made up, but it's not. Russ is a pastor in Nashville. He's also a remarkably productive writer. I've always admired his discipline and his gift for storytelling. A few years back, Russ published a book called Struck, a memoir of his harrowing experience with open-heart surgery and the long, slow recovery thereafter. He and I sat down to talk about memoir and the reliability of memory. So you and I were just talking about a quotation from Annie Dillard about memoir.
Yeah.
The gist of it is, hey, don't write memoir to preserve your memories, because memoir is going to blow up your memories.
Yes. Kind of the idea that when you go through the process of writing something down, which includes editing, revision, trying to craft the form of the text, trying to pull in all the details and synthesize all of the details as you remember them, what you'll end up doing is probably not really getting a completely accurate account of what really happened, but you will now have a written record of what happened, and the written record then will replace memory because you spent more time crafting and writing the thing than you actually did living the experience that you're talking about. So it's a fascinating thing. I've written memoir, and I'm drawn to memoir. And one of the things that happens when you write something, say you write something about your childhood, and your brother comes along and says, "Hey, I read what you wrote. That's not how I remember it at all." And you're convinced, like, I didn't lie. I didn't make anything up. And they're not lying, and they're not making anything up. But I had this happening in this family car, and they had this happening actually not in a car at all, but in our living room, or something like that. So it's a fascinating part of memoir, because you will just, once you've written something down, it's hard to go back and remember it any other way. But our memories are not reliable because they're not like videotapes. Our memories don't just go and replay the event as it happened.
Yeah. I had somebody tell me, when I was in one of my online writing classes, I was having them write sort of mini memoir, 500 words about some memory. And I was insisting, one of the rules was you can't talk about the emotional side of it. You've got to just, you need to write about it in such a way that it's emotional, but you are you're presenting the events, the experiences that generated emotion in you, and the idea is if you represent that effectively, you will produce the emotions that you want to produce. And one of the students wrote back and said, "Hey, listen, my memory is very emotional. I don't know what I remember is the emotions."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, too bad, because that's true for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. For all of us, we mostly remember the emotional states.
Yeah.
And then it almost feels like we're filling in the physical, the concrete facts."
Well, what we do is we remember events because they had emotional heft, right?
Yeah.
They had they made an impact on us.
Yeah.
But then the details, we get more and more fuzzy on the details. And then when we're remembering two details and they don't, they contradict each other, mm-hmm. then we have to do the work of trying to smooth out the contradiction. Oh, so it must not have been that. It must have been this other thing. And now you're constructing a narrative at that point,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah, right.
There's Malcolm Gladwell does a podcast called Revisionist History, mm-hmm. and one of the episodes, if you've not listened to it, Free Brian Williams is the episode to listen to.
Yeah, I've heard that episode.
And he does this. He does this thing where he talks about the flashbulb moments, do you know where you were when the Shutter Challenger blew up, or when 9/11 happened, or when JFK was shot, or these big kind of culturally defining moments. And when 9/11 happened, universities kind of swung into action, and they interviewed people, and they asked them 3 questions: where were you, who were you with, and how did you feel? And they asked them 2 days after the event. They asked them 1 month after the event, 1 year after the event, and then 10 years after the event.
Wow.
And they compared the answers of these people. And they asked people at universities around the country, asked these same questions to people. And what they found is that over time, their answers changed. Mm-hmm. But their confidence in their answers didn't change.
Wow.
And so, so somebody would say, I was in my neighbor's apartment and we were drinking coffee, and the interviewer will say, they'll say that a year later, or and they'll say, actually, 2 days after the event, you said that you were in your own apartment alone.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, no, I wasn't though. I was in my neighbor's and I was having coffee. And they're like, yeah, but it's in your handwriting. And they'll look at their own handwriting and they'll say, I'm not sure why I would have written that.
Yeah.
Because I know that's not what was happening. I don't know I don't know if I was lying but I don't know what.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me because we live in a world where there's so much autobiography and memoir, even history books. Like if you read a history of World War II, what you're really reading is you're reading an author writing about World War II. Mm-hmm. And so they're recounting the events for you, but you're reading it as though it's a historical record, as though it's just nothing but the facts, ma'am. I'm just reporting from the field.
Yeah.
When in fact, what's happened, for that to become something that you're sitting there reading, is a text has been crafted.
Yeah.
And it's been crafted to be readable, which is not to say the person lied.
Yeah.
But it is to say they were thinking about, how can I write this in a way that's engaging to a reader? How can I write this in a way that is infusing some meaning into the significance of the events that we're writing about? And then in the process, if you think too much about it, you'll start to doubt everything you've ever read.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I want to talk to you about something that I tell my writing students that you might disagree with.
Okay.
Given what you just said, I wonder if you disagree with it. I often talk to people about do you trust that the world is infused with meaning already? And if you do, can you, as an act of faith, just depict what you saw in the confidence and in the faith that the meaning will make its way out? And so I try to challenge my mm-hmm. writing students not to infuse meaning, but to tell what happened and trust that the meaning will make its way out.
I disagree with you.
Would you suggest that that's a fool's errand?
I would suggest that it is on a certain level an impossible task, mm-hmm. Because we make so many choices in the process of writing. We mm-hmm. choose the words we choose the sentence, we choose the order of the sentences, we choose the way that we give the information, right? And so if I say to you, I went to a birthday party yesterday. It was for my dog. I've given you something where I teased you with the birthday party, and then I said it was for my dog, and you're going to hear it a certain way. You're like, why would you have a birthday party for your dog? If I just said to you it was my dog's birthday yesterday, I don't know where I'm going with all that, other than to say that when the way we pay out the information leads people down a road. Yeah. And so the order in which we construct the information we pay out is building a narrative thread. And so as the author, you are building a narrative thread, and you are choosing, you're prioritizing, you're creating a hierarchy. So I don't know how you avoid it. I don't know how you avoid infusing some kind of meaning. Even choosing to write anything at all is an act of infusing meaning into something, because you're saying
of all those other things I didn't tell you
all the things I could have told you about, I told you about this.
Which makes me wonder, when people have a bumper sticker on there, because they've got one bumper sticker, and I'm thinking, that's the one thing you wanted me to know about you? Of all the things in your life, right. You wanted me to know that you went to Wall Drug in South Dakota?
Yes. What happened to put this on that?
And then I end up constructing a story. Well, obviously you have a child who wanted that bumper sticker, and you love your child, and so you put the bumper sticker on.
Yeah, the vast majority of the bumper stickers on my parents' vehicles I put there without them knowing.
Right.
Just to see how long. Yeah. And their counter to that was to never acknowledge it and also never take it off. So they just stripped me of the satisfaction of the prank.
Yeah, right.
By just letting it ride.
Yeah. Okay, so we seem to be descending into some sort of situation in which there's that all the meaning comes from the author. Are we giving up on trying to tell the truth in our memoir?
No, I think you need to be telling the truth when you're writing memoir, and you need to be doing it with as clear a conscience as you can have of saying, I'm representing the truth as best as I can remember it. There's a bit of a difference, I think, between relaying fact and telling truth. I think telling truth is has a bit of a broader field to work in. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are 4 Gospels that are telling the same story about the life of Jesus. They tell it in different ways. They have different audiences in mind, and so there are different emphases that the different Gospel writers make. They're not contradicting each other. They're relaying a body of information and content, but they're also thinking about the relationship between the author and the audience, and they're thinking about the significance of this will mean this to the person I'm reading, or this might get missed if I don't explain it to the person I'm reading or writing to. And so I don't think we move away from it with memoir. But I do think, and maybe this is part of the reason why I'm so drawn to the topic, is as somebody who writes memoir, I've had to think a lot about my own integrity in the process, knowing I'm going to write something in my own about me and my mother may disagree with this account. Yeah. So what do? Do I go to her and say, well, why don't you tell me the account and I'll write that one? And then how do I know she's any more correct than I am? And so the answer is not, well, let's just be silent Let's just be completely silent about it. Let's figure out how to tell the story in a way that where it does matter that it's factual, and where the details can be a little bit more imprecise. We're still holding on to, I'm trying to be as precise as I can. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It makes sense.
Do you disagree with me?
I mean, no, because, how can, there's no disagreeing with that.
Right.
I guess we have to acknowledge that there are people who lie on purpose in their writing. And maybe we'll take them out of the equation. I don't think people who are listening to this conversation, I'm trusting that they're not people who are just liars.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
I am interested in this idea of what do you do knowing that if I write this, my mother could disagree with what I'm saying about this.
Well,
it's really interesting. I don't know if that's a standard. It's interesting fact.
Well, I think it's because I've done some of what I've written has been about my childhood, and so I remember it as being the child, you know, and she remembers it as being the parent and being the grown up.
Yeah.
And so my memories are they're a child's memories that have then continued on with me into adulthood that I'm now trying to synthesize. Her memories of it will be how she interacted with that moment as an adult. Mm-hmm. And then I think, well, okay, my kids are having experiences and I'm interacting with them as an adult and I'm not engaged with it in the same way they are. Somewhere in there, though, there's truth, you know,
Yeah.
and then somewhere there's things that are just lost to time.
Yeah.
And then there's the sense of what happened, you know, and the lore of how the story has been preserved over time and told.
Yeah.
Where it gets slippery. It gets slippery. Yeah. Whenever anybody tells you, I'm just reporting the facts.
Yeah, right.
It's like, well, you're mostly just reporting the facts.
One thing that has really changed for me in thinking about these issues is when I see how wrong my kids can be about, I say wrong, I mean that tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
You know, how their notion of what happened, how completely different it is from what I'm using air quotes now, know happened.
Right.
It makes me think, these things I knew about my own parents.
Right.
If I could be as wrong as my kids are about my own parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I'm working on this. I've had to acknowledge I was probably just as wrong about my parents as my kids have been. Yeah. Again, I'm speaking tongue in cheek here. I know my kids aren't wrong. Their experience is their experience.
Yeah.
But the ways in which we without knowing it, without paying attention to the fact that we're doing it, ascribe motive to other people, and how that hardens into truth.
Yeah.
I think that's where my biggest concern with these questions is. It's the. I mean, I barely know my own motives, and yet I've got my ideas about motives of people who, you know, a teacher that I, you know, a teacher or a sibling or whatever. And I realize the extent to which those motives are such an important part of the story, and I have no idea what their motives are.
Yeah, and that's the meaning making, right? That is the I'm putting the puzzle together. I'm putting a problem together, and I'm trying to solve it, and then write about it, and then tell you about it. You know, and then I can't give you everything. I have to give you just the stuff that I think is germane, and then you know, and then you're going to read it, and you're going to go back and say, hey, listen to what I found out, you know, and then it just kind of goes through. It's interesting. It's an interesting part of the process of memoir and autobiography, and just writing it, journaling even is holding with a kind of a humble, open hand. I'm doing my best to represent what I think is true, and I'm also doing my best to convey something that is worth a reader's time to read. But I'm not playing back a videotape. Yeah.
Can I return to the idea of motive for a minute?
Yes.
Because I'm getting very interested in this idea now that we're sitting here talking about this. Motive is so important in storytelling.
Yeah.
It's incredibly important. When you're writing fiction or I'm writing, you know, have you ever written fiction?
Not really.
Yeah.
Well, unless my memoir.
Yeah, right. Good question.
It turns out to be.
Good point. Yeah. But we are unabashed in I mean, motive is so important in fiction. You know, why somebody is doing something. And matter of fact, one of my exercises in writing is to say, let's take an event that actually happened, and then think of what if people had completely different motives that led up to the same event, or given this event, what if people had completely different motives? What happens next? And that's a really interesting and productive well for storytelling. Is changing up the motives. But in memoir, the only person's motives I know are my own, if that, and probably not that. And that's where this gets very squirrely.
Yes.
So, the floor is now open. Russ.
Well, I mean, yes, that's one of those things that I think in writing memoir, you just have to be so humble and willing to own that in the process, and willing to edit yourself in the process of saying, I need to write what I think will hold up with integrity. Mm-hmm. And a good test is to say, think of something that happened 5 years ago to you that was very upsetting. And try to remember, if you didn't journal about it, try to remember, how did you read it when it happened? Mm-hmm. And how do you read it now? Because I'll bet what you'll find is that in some respects, the villain in the story has your perception of them has morphed. Mm-hmm. In some cases, maybe it's like, oh, I was way too hard. Mm-hmm. I see more, or maybe it's like, I didn't even suspect that they were the villain, and now I see with clarity, oh, this was an abusive person or whatever. Yeah. I think our perceptions change over time as we get more information and as we get a little bit more critical distance from our own raw emotional reaction, So if you're unsure, or if you're assigning motive, especially if you're assigning a motive that is denigrating to a person's character, then I think you need to in the process of just being humble in the way that you write, you need to be careful what you assert,
sure.
And maybe just leave stuff out, or maybe say, maybe I shouldn't trust my own take on this if I'm the clear hero and there's a clear villain,
Yeah, right. Yeah. In the process of writing Struck, did you change anything based on what somebody... You had people reading that before you published it, right?
Yes.
And did you change anything based on somebody else's memory?
Yes. So there's a part of that book where I'm spending time as I'm recovering from heart surgery with a friend of ours, who was dying from cancer at the same time. And so we would get together regularly and talk about that. And I walked with her through the end of her life, and I wrote about it in the book. And one of the things I did is I gave my account of her last days to her husband to read and to give me feedback and to give me blessing. If he didn't give me his blessing for that to be in the book, I wasn't going to put it in the book, and I was going to have a problem because I'd have to figure out, like,
this is a major part of the book.
A pretty major part of the book. But he corrected timelines. He gave me insight into things that I only had partial knowledge of. Yeah. He gave me some details that I just didn't even know at all, and so that was helpful. I also had one person that I spoke with about writing about difficult relationships, and they said, as much as you don't want to write anything overtly criticizing somebody, you should also not want to do that in a veiled way either. Like, don't, and this person said, if you do, you'll probably find a year or two later that you wish you hadn't included that in the book. And I deleted some paragraphs from Struck in the writing process based on that advice.
These paragraphs weren't about me, were they?
They were not about you. Okay. They were not about you. But it was the kind of thing where we wound each other. Yeah. And so you want to tell some of those stories. And I think the advice they were giving me was, if you are wounded by somebody, is that anybody else's business to really know? Especially in the form of a book, which is kind of forever. And then if you're going to do it in a veiled way, I will say in Struck, there are one or two sentences that I know carry some freight that the person who doesn't know the story, or even does know the story, would not pick up on. Huh. But I know. And honestly, now when I read them, I think, I could have done without that.
Yeah.
I could have done without that.
Yeah.
It was cathartic,
Yeah, right.
But yeah.
Yeah, but you can have that catharsis without leaving it in.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, there's a great thing. It's a great practice sometimes to write it down and then delete it.
Yep.
As opposed to, hey, don't write it. No, sometimes it's cathartic to write it.
Yeah.
But then...
That's right. We need to distinguish the difference between writing something and then foisting it on other people, making them read it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I had in my Flannery O'Connor book a reader, suggested that I take out a story that didn't reflect super well on her, on Flannery O'Connor, and B was somewhat hearsay. Mm-hmm. I think it was probably true, but nevertheless, it was not well documented. And he said, I don't think you want to do that. And I'm so glad that I didn't include that story in that book. Yeah.
So you heeded the advice. You said,
I did heed the advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was very thankful for somebody stepping in and saying, I'm not sure you want to do this.
Yeah. Usually if you have somebody that knows you and you trust and they come and they say in a concerned way, I don't know that you want to do this, ties should go to them a lot of times.
Yeah,
I
think that's right.
They're seeing something you're not seeing and taking the risk in friendship to say, future you is not going to want present you to do what you're doing. Yeah.
It is, I have, when it comes to tattoos, I think, man, that's a mighty permanent thing to do, to get a tattoo. But it's not any more permanent than publishing something.
Right. Oh, gosh. Yes.
And at least a tattoo you can cover up.
Yeah. You have a friend of mine who does college ministry, and a number of years ago somebody wrote a book about dating, and he was trying to get the guy to come to his college group so they could debate. I was like, man, that's kind of aggressive. He goes, look, it's in a book. It's when you publish it in a book and you put it out in the world, it's public. It's a public forum. The gloves are off. It's appropriate to debate. If it was just something he said in conversation, I wouldn't want to bring him into the college ministry and debate him. But it's a book, and it's being read by a lot of people. Yeah.
Okay. The one other thing I wanted to, we're kind of running out of time, but I still want to hear you talk about this.
Yeah.
In Struck, you're writing memoir. You're already talking about the sort of fuzziness or the slipperiness of memory, and in your case, this is compounded by heavy drugs.
Yes. Lots and lots and lots.
Maybe I should specify, in case someone listening, Struck is about your heart surgery and recovery therefrom.
Yes.
Although I think one summary that I came up with for it was Russ Ramsey gets naked and cusses.
Yes, I do.
Or takes drugs, gets naked and cusses.
Yeah. That's all true. One of the things
that's
I
all
did.
there in the book.
Yeah,
it's a matter of public record, Russ.
It's a matter of public record. That's right. You come and debate me. But it covers a 24-month window of time. And one of the things that I did in that process is I kept a little notebook in my pocket with me all the time, and I wrote down things that happened, details, and so. But I would say of Struck that I'm confident that I am representing the truth of the way things happened. But I was heavily medicated for a lot of that, and I will also tell you that I crafted a narrative, and very intentionally. I wrote the memoir as a way, and I describe it in the beginning as I say, I use my suffering and the story of my suffering as not the subject of the book, but the setting in which the story is told. Because what I found as I would share things about what I was going through is that people would say, hey, that's helping me process my own affliction. But their affliction was a divorce or a vocational crisis or a miscarriage or cancer or something like that. And so it's different. And yet so I was looking for where are the points of contact, and then how can I talk about those points of contact, the distance the afflicted feels from the well, the depression that comes after surgery, the difficulty of reentry, rehabilitation, the work of showing up and going through the paces, all these things that I know translate into so many other areas of suffering and affliction. How can I write about my story in a way that is accessible and instructive and helpful to them without ever also saying, now here are 3 application points I want you, dear reader, to take onto yourself,
Yeah.
And so I admit, memoir is crafting a narrative. It's saying, here's a significant window of time where something significant happened, and I'm telling you about it. And in the act of doing that, you're infusing significance into it. There's just no way around it,
All right.
Way to hold your ground.
I'm just not. That language of infusing meaning is still bothering me.
Yeah.
I think there's also such a thing as uncovering meaning, as depicting meaning, as...
Is it different?
Maybe this is just a different vocabulary.
Right. Because depicting meaning is calling attention to something you as the author find meaningful.
My problem is the word infusing suggests that the meaning is coming from me and I'm putting it into the story.
Okay. Yeah. I can see that, although I do think that even depicting meaning is editorial.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure. That's right. I've chosen to, as we said already, I've chosen to show you this meaning instead of this other meaning.
You're already on the path of trying to parlay meaning for the reader when you write the first letter of the paragraph, of the first paragraph of the,
Sure.
You're just, the undertaking of writing itself.
Yeah.
Is even your drunk postman story. You tell that story, it was meaningful to you, to even zero in on that of the millions of other, things you could have written about. So
yeah.
That was a deep cut right there, the drunk postman.
That's right. Yeah, maybe we can link to it in the show notes.
That's right, in the show notes.
Yeah. All right, man. Thank you so much.
Yep.
I always love sitting down and talking about writing with you for a little while.
I love that you're doing this. I can't wait to go back and listen.
Yeah. All right, man. Thanks.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio and the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to the Arcadian Wild for allowing us to use their delightful song Finch in the Pantry as part of this podcast. Check out their album of the same name for more excellent music.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to fostering Christ-centered community and spiritual formation through music, story, and art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.